That brings us to item number 15 under discussion, which is proposed new board policy IKADD, content and credit recovery, shown in Exhibit C. Mr. Giuliano, we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gant.
At the table tonight.
Absolutely. If I could draw your attention to Exhibit C, I'd like to discuss policy IKADD, content and credit recovery. At the same time, the new administrative rule that accompanies it, as far as the exhibit along with it as well for the application. If you shift over to the next page, IKADD, content and credit recovery. To give a little context and history is with uniform grading, we passed Grading Assessment Systems, IKAR, administrative rule back in November of 2017. With that, we realized that there was going to be a need for a content and credit recovery policy as well. We received a few versions from the School Boards Association, but realized there was some inaccuracies, and I need to credit certainly Ms. Colleen Boisonneau, who's over here, our coordinator of mathematics. She is a guru of being able to catch those inaccuracies, and she caught several of them, which is why we have delayed the process of bringing it to you until today. We did start to bring it back on February 12th, so you did have a chance to hear part of that, but then again found one more error that needed to be corrected through school boards, and we're at the point now that we think that it is currently going to not change at this point. So if I can draw you to the policy IKADD, we put together a committee led by Ms. Boisonneau that also had our Director of Secondary Education. We had a high school principal on this committee, high school guidance counselor, a high school assistant principal for instruction, a high school teacher, and also our coordinator of mathematics on that committee. That committee reviewed the policy and the administrative rule, as well as the application. And then after that, all of our high school principals, including our director here at the center and our principal at the Academy for Success, also reviewed this policy and offered recommendations and feedback. Content recovery, you can see as defined there. Content recovery, it consists of a course-specific skill-based learning opportunity for students that are still enrolled in that course. So content recovery really applies to students that are enrolled in that course, where they can retake a subset of that course while they're still enrolled in that course. It could be a single unit or supplemental assignments for content recovery. For credit recovery applies more to course-specific skill-based learning opportunities when students have failed to master content or skills required to receive that credit in that given course. So those are the definitions that really apply for IKADD, and we certainly, you notice the section on student athletes, we always want to make sure that we're in compliance with NCAA regulations to make sure that they are eligible as they move on if that's a direction they wish to pursue. If I flip the page to IKADD, that's our administrative rule, we'll notice for content recovery, students are limited to one attempt for each credit recovery assignment. Our committees that were formed really thought that one attempt was important to make sure there were some limits on how many times students could retake a particular subset, a particular assignment. For grading for content recovery, assignments must be completed no later than 10 days, 10 school days after the date they are assigned. That's to make sure that there is some kind of regulations set forth that students can follow to make sure that they're completing the assignments on time, and also to help our teachers so our teachers can keep up with the assignments that are being given. For credit recovery, a student really that, this is not for a student that wishes to modify the GPA. They really should retake that full course if they want to modify the GPA. The credit recovery really only recovers that credit for the course. And the eligibility-wise for credit recovery, it's if they obtain a grade of 50 or higher in the initial credit course. So between a 50 and a 59 would apply for credit recovery. To the next page, just want to highlight a few more items of credit recovery. Students who are already received a credit for the course are ineligible to participate in credit recovery to improve their final grade. Again, it's just to recover that credit, not to improve their final grade or their GPA. And credit recovery only applies to students in grades 9 through 12, so those students in our high schools. As far as the instruction and the curriculum, they certainly can use Apex Learning, which is an online computer-based program that we offer here in our district that Ms. Boisano leads and helps facilitate the training for our schools. They can use virtual SC or direct instruction by a certified teacher, either in person or via distance learning. So there's different options to be able to maintain and get that credit. And then finally, for our grading, if through credit recovery, it's GPA neutral again, so at the end of the course, they would get that P for passing, which would be 60 and above, or they would get an NP for not passing if they're below a 60. And then the final page is our exhibit. That's a credit recovery application, which our committee felt was important to be able to make sure that students, number one, you'll notice that top section, students have a chance to read over the policy and make sure that they're signing and understand what they're doing for credit recovery. So there's an understanding before they take that credit recovery opportunity. And then the parent legal guardian also has a chance to sign and to review the policy so they're aware of everything that needs to take place in order for credit recovery. That gives them a chance to make sure they're making the best choice for their child. At this point, Mr. Gann, I'll open up to any questions that may be here for IKADD.
Okay, Mr. Cates.
Every time I read this, I think I'm getting it, and then I hear somebody talk about it, and I'm in doubt, so help me. I understand content versus recovery versus credit recovery. Content recovery, they're still in the class. Maybe there was a section that they did poorly on, and they're given the opportunity to recover from that. It says it is basically GPA neutral, but with our current policy that would allow a grade of, I'll use 0 as the worst case scenario, then really, are they able to recover from that, even if they score 100 on the content recovery? They're still basically failing because of that 0. Those zeros have such a profound impact, and a lot of times our students they get to that place and they don't see any hope to get out of that hole, so then often the choices become poor choices. So that's my first question, is how do we balance their ability to I understand they need to recover the content, that's the important part, but how they also recover the grade, have some hope for success that keeps them motivated to progressing forward in that course.
So for credit recovery, it's GPA neutral, but for content recovery, they do have an opportunity where they would take that assignment that they currently had, their original grade, and it's averaged with the new grade from the makeup test or assignment or whatever it may be. So they do have an opportunity to be able to improve that particular grade for that particular assignment in content recovery.
That would, I'm not trying to split hairs, but that would depend on the initial grade.
Correct.
Right? The initial grade could be low enough that even 100 on the content recovery doesn't move them.
Bring them up to 50 if they had a
right.
0, yes.
And I do get concerned. I want students to be assessed and earn the. I'm often telling my boys they'll complain about a grade they were given, and I always rephrase that as the grade they earned through their work. And I also don't want them to be in a place where they just give up because there's no hope to dig out of the hole. So I don't know if it's within this policy that we would address that, but I do have that concern. And I think you clarified it for me for credit recovery. I always understood that would not improve their GPA. They're recovering the credit they need necessarily to graduate, but then you said they could retake the course. So that would be, one way would be through some of the online opportunities that they have. That doesn't improve their GPA, it recovers the credit, but they could re-enroll in the course, basically start over, and then that may or may not, depending on the grade they earn in that. Is that
That's correct.
clear? Okay.
They do-
It's coming together. It's only taking me.
That's correct. They would have.
He's
the
going to be a
option-
senior, and I'm getting there. But
But to back up to your first question too, that's a legitimate concern that we have too. Is to a student that earns a 0, is what can that child do? So that comes down to the education of our teachers, our guidance counselors, our administrators that are working with the students, because we don't want students to feel like it's hopeless and they don't have a chance to earn a positive grade. So we really want our teachers to be able to intervene at an early point, so we're not giving a lot of 0s and those students are already saying, I can't do this anymore, and they're giving up. That's a valid concern that goes back to the education of us working with our teachers in our schools.
And I know as a power school hawk, those 0s remind me to remind them, I won't pick on one of them in particular, but them, that is probably a missed assignment. And I see that, and I recognize often, but I do get concerned. There are those times when we want our students to have every ability to be successful, and always want to encourage them to reach a little further than they think maybe even they can. And I get concerned that when we get down below that 50, it has such a negative impact on their ability to pull out of that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ms. Hammond.
I have a couple of questions. I would tell you, Mr. Cates, as a teacher, it really, this content recovery is a wonderful aspect for students, and every teacher, it's really designed to intervene way before they're going to be unsuccessful. I mean, it really does work well, and the student and the teacher, your answer was just right about it's the education that we tell our teachers, and that's their hope too. So I think this works, and I was just going to say, as a teacher, I use it, and we intervene so quickly, and it pulls that kid from a hopeless situation. But my question, I have one I wanted to ask. It's kind of a data question. I worried about, and this may be more even Dr. Melton, when we changed our failure to 60. I mean, 60 and above was passing, where it used to be 60 and below. You didn't pass with a 60; it was an F. Do we see more failures? Do we have any data on that? That now that you don't fail, it's 59 and below, which is really taking to me, the standard down. I mean, I worried about that when we voted on it, but as we were presented, we need to be competitive, and that was why I understood that it was brought to us, and I supported it. But I was very curious, do we see more need of these failures, of who do have to recover, and then those with the content? I really don't look at the content as much because they've got an opportunity to pass there, but the failure and the recovery, do we see more of that and more of these applications coming into us since it's a lower amount, or we've got less people failing because we've made it a lower score to fail?
I don't have the exact data to be able to share that, but I do think it's less students that are failing with the change.
Think, yeah.
That's what we've seen is less. With this, we see that there's going to be a greater need for that content recovery. There'll be less of a need for credit recovery. That will certainly be lessened.
Right.
But content recovery will certainly be much more popular, and we'll have many more students seeking content
Yes.
recovery.
Okay. Would you agree, Dr. Melton? You want to add?
More is depending on what measure you're looking at, right? So if we're talking about more math or more ELA, if we look at the total number itself, first I commend Ms. Boisoneau. She has been, as Mr. Giuliano said, the guru, but also she has herded this and make sure that she is directly connected with APIs, principals, teachers, et cetera, et cetera. So she takes this with great responsibility, which I hats off and salute her to for this. If we look at sheer data as far as summer school, Dr. Harris supervises our summer school program for high schools. In the Office of Instruction, Mr. Giuliano supervises our middle level. I can say we have more involved with middle level summer school this year than last. Could it be one variable over another? Maybe. There's a variety of aspects that we look at, from the reset to new standards to new assessments to higher expectations. So there's a myriad of things that I can't say tease out one specific item. Dr. Harris and his staff, of course, are intentional to monitor absenteeism because of the new truancy expectations for the academic year we just completed. So there's a lot of variables that come into it. But I would like to echo what Mr. Giuliano said. The role of the teacher is to make sure that we are intervening with content so that we don't have to do recovery. So I celebrate our involvement of our teachers and their supervision to try to reduce the number of recovery. For those students that do need summer school, whether it's middle level or high school, there are other variables associated. It may be mobility, it may be some family issues, it may be a content issue. Whatever the issue is, we know we've got the right kids, but also the right teachers serving kids throughout the summer. So I can't say to you that we've seen a stark decline, but if you all remember, we had to adhere to the state uniform grading scale. That was not something that was a local control. That was expected across the state of South Carolina. So we all had our political take on it, and we had some questions about rigor and expectations of concern we had here locally, but in the end, we had to adhere with what we were expected to do as defined by our State Board of Education.
And then I simply was going to ask, are the content recovery and the credit recovery, it's middle through high school? We don't have any type of program like that in elementary, or do we, Dr. Milton?
So for our credit recovery is just grades 9 through 12, so that's high school. Right. For our content recovery, it can be encompassing within middle school as well.
Mr. Gant, would this be a place to ask about the, this is the first year that we had the, is it third grade? If they're not at a certain level, they had to repeat, which would, in my mind, it would be recovery. Have we got numbers on that for the end of this year? I was just really curious. If it's okay to ask that now, Mr. Gant.
Certainly you can ask. I don't have the data accessible. I can say that Mr. Giuliano and staff have been recruiting additional students, so we have actually included second graders that are rising into third grade to make sure that we intervene quickly for those students that have been identified as below grade level. Our plan is to bring a report to the board. We have invited you all to the reading celebration, which that date is not coming to mind. Mr. Giuliano, I may quiz you on the spot if you remember when that is. We're going to be having our annual reading celebration of students, but remember, we can't require every student to attend, but there is a good cause exemption of which Mr. Giuliano has handled on a per case basis that has involved every principal, every parent, and every student. So we are collecting that data to bring forward to you. In the end, we hope and we expect our summer reading camp to be successful to make sure those third graders rising into fourth are going to be successful. And the same thing for those second graders rising into third grade, so that next year we see a reduction in third grade achievement as far as every areas of concern, but an increase of overall proficiency of achievement for third graders next year. Mr. Giuliano, if you have any of that data that you're comfortable sharing, you're welcome to give a preview, but don't give away the whole report yet.
Sure, absolutely. And our summer reading camp celebration, which you should be receiving an invitation to if you haven't already, is July 26th at 10:30, so you're always welcome to come to that celebration. As far as our data for our third grade students, we had 59 students across our district that scored not met 1, which qualifies them for retention, but out of those students, 58 students qualified for a good cause exemption, which promoted them to the fourth grade. Only 1 student did not. That student has an opportunity in the summer reading camp to be promoted to fourth grade through summer reading camp.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you. Dr. Wildman had a good question that she asked me earlier today, and it was as part of the draft of the content and credit recovery policy. It's the very last sentence dealing with student athletes. Consult the district athletic director for more information. I don't believe we have a district athletic department. Should this be school athletic director for more information, or how does that work?
So part of the responsibility as a director of secondary education is to coordinate with all of our athletic directors. So in that regard, we were thinking of specifically for the coming year, Dr. Ross. Although he does not have that title, he has those responsibilities under Mr. Giuliano's supervision. We, of course, did not recognize Dr. Ross tonight because, believe it or not, he's on vacation this week. Ms. Stowers called and invited him, but we prefer he take vacation after the schedule he's upheld the last few weeks. So the draft there would be actually in reference to Dr. Ross, but if you would like for us to include a revision of something about defining that's the director of secondary education, we can certainly make sure that's more user-friendly, since we don't have, like some districts do, an official title for district athletic director or coordinator.
Well, personally, I think it would be more appropriate to list the proper person, so just, or not person, but the job title.
Absolutely. Noted that. We can make that revision.
And my other question, and I'm just struggling with this credit recovery. I see where a student can, for credit recovery, modify his or her GPA, but then there seems there's some contradiction. Can you give me just a concrete example of what credit recovery would be, where you're not modifying your GPA, and what it, I know a student has to repeat the full course. And what's the difference? Why? I just don't understand that difference.
Sure. So for credit recovery, it's GPA neutral, so you would not be able to change your GPA unless you were to retake that class. So you could enroll in it again and retake it. If you just want to get that credit, then credit recovery just to earn that credit, but it would not affect your GPA whatsoever. On your transcript, it would go down as a P for passing or an NP for not passing.
So it's credit for taking the course,
For taking the course.
The credits that they need to graduate.
Yes, correct.
Okay, it's not, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. I know it's getting late, but I want to make sure we get this clear. Content recovery puts all the emphasis on the teacher identifying that student. It says students are eligible for participation in content recovery through the recommendation of their classroom teacher based on a variety of factors. Is there any way we are communicating, pushing this out? Do our parents know that there's an option to recover content? I think of a student maybe in a foreign language class that is falling behind. They're keeping up, but they're not. They're just kind of making it. Is anybody communicating to those families, hey, there's an option here to recover the content, and it could help you be more successful in this class? Because I don't hear a lot of that. I hear it here, and because I'm connected, I know about it, but I'm trying to think of the places as a parent, that I hear about it. And when I put that lens on, I don't hear it.
So absolutely, and part of content and credit recovery is we have district procedures that we have, and part of those procedures is communicating with families to make sure that families, especially as we update, and this is a new policy that we're bringing forth, to make sure that our parents and our students are aware of the content recovery options that are available to them. So that communication will be done through teachers, certainly in handbooks as well, but just to make sure through their class syllabus and everywhere else that it's communicated with them that there is a chance for content recovery if necessary.
And what I would add to that, since we're passing the baton, Mr. Giuliano has taken it with a sprint pace at this point and is doing masterfully. But notice it's all blue. Right. So this is a brand new policy that we know we've got to be responsible to communicate differently. You heard Mr. Giuliano say there's been a handbook which Ms. Boissonneau has worked with multiple staff members to make sure we update and revise every year. But because the number of changes at the State Department of Education, you heard Mr. Giuliano's timeline of how we pulled this policy from previously to make sure that when we brought this to you, we were most confident that we wouldn't have to pull it again. But there's a disclaimer of that could happen potentially. So once we pass a policy, we want to make sure that we communicate using Ms. Goggins and her staff to make sure that it's in course syllabus, but we also respect the fact that not every parent's going to read every course syllabus because there's so much information being bombarded to parents at once. So we've got to make sure we transition from procedures and processes to policies and adherence to policy, which is going to require a lot of leadership at the teacher level, which Ms. Boyson will be working on with all content coordinators, not just under her supervision of math, make sure the other coordinators are involved with this as well. So this will become part of the leadership language to make sure teacher leaders understand it, principals understand it, all the various responsibilities, guidance directors. So stakeholders will be involved with that. You heard Mr. Giuliano's description of committee involvement. So once this policy progresses through a final approval eventually, then we'll go back through the process to make sure the right stakeholders have this information to then communicate it and monitor the effectiveness of that communication. We're concerned that this won't be ready for the start of school, but our hope is that we'll have it ready before the first quarter were to end so that we don't have as much credit recovery, we can have content recovery going on so that the deficit doesn't become too large.
I'd love to see some mechanism to where at the midterm, if a student were below a certain threshold, that there was an automatic trigger to communicate to that family, to that caregiver, so they would know that there's some options, whether we used, and that'd be a great use of our technology. I mean, we know in Power School at that midterm, that interim, at the interim, and I don't know how hard that would be.
Mr. Holden will figure it out.
It sounds easy, but I know it's much more complicated.
Van Holden will find a solution.
But you know what I'm saying? Just some kind of communication that we document. Hey, whether they take advantage of it, you can't. I just want to make sure they know about it.
Absolutely.
We had great discussion, but I remind everybody we are in the discussion phase, so I hear some revisions coming.
Yes.
I know Dr. Ross has come back to town. We got some places there to work, so we'll look forward to it coming forward with some of these suggestions as we move through it. And that would take us probably to our next item 16, which is a proposed new board policy, IKFC employability credential. So, Mr. Giuliano, we're going to come to you again for an overview.
Absolutely. If I could bring your attention to Exhibit D for IKFC. This is our employability credential. Again, this policy is also in blue because it is a new policy as well that we're bringing forth. For this policy as well, we formed a committee with our Director of Special Services, our Coordinator of Special Services as well, Curriculum Coordinator, and then we also had 6 special ed teachers on our committee. In the same as the other policy, we also had all high school principals review this, as well as the director at the center and the Academy for Success. And Dr. Slatton is here in attendance behind me. Dr. Slatton was pivotal in making sure that this policy was reviewed by the committee and then also bringing forth the recommendations for today. I do need to commend Dr. Slatton for her forward thinking because we were ahead of this policy. She's been ahead of it for a few years now. All of you are very familiar with Project Search and also Boom. This applies to those students that are in Project Search and Boom. She's been ahead of this to try to make sure we provide opportunities for these students in preparation of this employability credential. So I do give her credit for that. For the employability credential, this will provide opportunities for students with disabilities to acquire employability skills. And the students will receive a uniform, state-recognized employability credential. These students would be identified through the IEP teams. The IEP teams would have to make sure they identify these students, and communication with families, communication with parents is pivotal to make sure everybody is aware of the opportunities for the students. These career-based educational program would include academics, work experiences, daily living skills, and self-determination and skill competencies. The IEP team would make that decision. They would use data to make that decision and make sure they communicate with families on a regular basis. The team would also consider a variety of program options before settling on one thing. They want to make sure that they meet the needs of the student and each individual student through that IEP. Through the bottom, you'll notice under annual notification that the employability credential cannot be utilized to enter a 4-year college or most 2-year colleges. What this employability credential would do is make sure that our students are ready for the workplace, that they're ready for the job. This credential they could use to be able to get a job. It would not be able to be used to go to a university or a college, which is why it's very important to make those informed decisions as an IEP team and to have that parent or guardian at the table making that decision with that team. As I turn the page, actually 2 pages, to the IKFC, the administrative rule, You'll notice the second paragraph. The state-recognized employability credential will begin in the 18-19 school year with grade 9 students. So you'll notice there's a gap with 10, 11, and 12th grade students. So in the next paragraph, what we're offering is a district-recognized employability credential, which will be aligned to the state-recognized employability credential. That'll fill that gap for those students that are currently in the 18-19 school year in grades 10, 11, and 12, because they would not be able to have that state-recognized credential yet. So Dr. Slatton and her team have been working for a few years to make sure that they were ready to have the courses appropriate for students to be able to earn that district-recognized employability credential. So you'll notice we have different options for the upcoming school year based upon 9th grade students or 10th, 11th, or 12th, but they'll all have an option for a recognized employability credential. At the bottom of this page, you'll notice the courses that they're required to take. Those courses are pretty much in alignment of what we have now. Dr. Slatton and her team are making the necessary adjustments, the minor adjustments to the few courses that need to be adjusted to make sure they meet this new employability credential. In that technology class, that's the one class that they really are revising to make sure that they can do the portfolio, which I'm going to talk about in the next page, which is part of the employability credential. They would do that in portfolio in that technology course. So as I flip over to the next page, you'll notice at the bottom, work-based learning and training. So they will have a chance to also do some work-based learning in food service, possibly maintenance, project search, and boom, as we've mentioned before. There's many different opportunities for them to complete that work-based learning opportunity because they must complete at least 360 hours. So it's really going to take a lot of communication beginning in our middle schools at 8th grade to make sure students and families are prepared as they enter that 9th grade so they can start earning those hours and then also be prepared for this credential. At the top of the page, you'll notice that they developed that portfolio that includes a multimedia presentation project, which is why it fits nicely into that technology class, so students will be prepared for the workplace. And they'll attain a work readiness assessment that demonstrates the student is ready for competitive employment. So with that, Mr. Gant, I'll open it up to any questions.
Any questions from the board? Great. We look forward to this coming forward with from draft into our first reading, but we appreciate the overview. And that takes us to item number 17, which is discussion about the approval and appointment of Richland County Board of Assessment. And Ms. Goggins is going to lead us with that. Inform us of that.
Thank you, Mr. Gant. The Richland County Board of Assessment Appeals consists of 7 members who serve 3-year terms. 3 appointments are made by the County Council and 1 each by the Columbia City Council, Board of Trustees of School District 1, Board of Trustees of School District 2, and Board of Trustees of School District 5. Tonight, we are recommending that Mr. Robert Robbie A. McMillan III be reappointed to serve as District 5 of Lexington and Richland County's appointee to the Richland County Board of Assessment Appeals, a role he's held since 2015. Mr. Millam has a wealth of experience and knowledge concerning School District 5, our community, and the real estate market. I spoke with Mr. Millam concerning his possible reappointment. He has graciously agreed to serve, and I'd note that this position does not receive any compensation except for travel reimbursement. Mr. Millam's professional credentials were included in our board packets, and the administration supports this recommendation and requests that the Board of Trustees approves this. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or discussion? We appreciate Mr. Milam offering to continue this. I know that's an area that is much needed, but it's hard to get people to do that. Something he has a great background for. Seeing no questions, well, we'll move that forward next time, and that brings us to item number 18. And I'll remind you before we take action that our next board meeting is August 13th, right here at the center. We'll look forward to that. And that will be just prior to a great event in the district. That's teachers coming back and students coming back. So hope everybody's enjoying the summer, but I know it's fast. There's a lot going on. So I would entertain a motion that we adjourn. Ms. Baumgardner? Do we have a second? Have a second? Ms. Hutchison seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously, and we thank you all for being here and participating.
Mr. Gant,
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to note that Dr. Milton has passed our initiation
That's true.
because we have made this into what really is a record-long meeting for us. So, but she passed it with, yeah, she deserves the gummies. So hopefully next time we won't have such a long meeting.
Great point. Thank you.